Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to all our listeners and viewers. You are tuned into We Matter, a space where we engage in meaningful conversations around mental well being, personal growth, and global learning. Today's episode is especially exciting as we explore education beyond borders and how changes within schools can spark broader changes in society. A topic that touches the very roots of how we learn, grow, and live together. So, before we feature our esteemed guest today, I would like to introduce my co host Musarat, who will set the tone for this episode and formally start conversations with our guest. Good morning, Musarat. Please tell us
Good
more
morning.
about please tell us more about our today's guest and the powerful topic we are going to explore. Yes, over to you.
Good morning, both. Good morning, Dr. Graham Ranger. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning. And I think whatever intro I will give for Sir Graham wouldn't be enough. Sir Graham had been part of AKDN, and Aga Khan Development Network has been engaged in creating quality of life through different agencies by contributing in education, health, architecture in a broad spectrum of activities. And Aga Khan Development Network has been passionately engaged in education. And from early childhood to post secondary education, teacher training, name it, whatever, Aga Khan Education Services have provided ample opportunities for teachers to grow, for students to learn, for new leadership to emerge, to create a inclusive society which believes in the power of giving the best to the world. Sir Graham.
Thank you, Musrat. Thank you very much, and thank you to the We Matter team for having the opportunity to speak with you and with the audience today. Let me introduce myself, if I may. I think and maybe a little bit about my background so that you can see where I'm coming from, if that would be helpful. I'm a school specialist. My interest when I did my doctorate, my focus then was on the leadership development of schooling in international contexts, both local leadership and international leadership, and how professionally those leaders could be prepared to be successful and be effective in that kind of role. But my experience has been first of all in public education. I'm English. I grew up in England, and my first part of my career was spent in the public sector, working in government schools. I then had the opportunity to work at the University of Oxford, Department of Educational Studies, and was a professor there working with young teachers, training teachers, aspiring teachers. And then I worked again in the public sector after that assignment to work with groups of schools, systems of schools. And that really got me into networks of schools and the power of schools collectively that a school group can have in society with their role and their influence on young people, particularly the future leaders, our leaders of tomorrow. And I had the opportunity, again, good fortune of being kind of spotted and asked to join a team that worked in Cameroon, in West Africa, in rainforests. I was an environmentalist by background. In terms of my educational expertise, started as a teacher, geography and geology, worked in Cameroon on fixed term periods. I didn't live out there all year. I worked out there with teachers and with school leaders, but always in rainforest environments because of the ecological drive for sustainability through education And obviously the challenges there were very great for those teachers and leaders in terms of the facilities they didn't have and the huge numbers of children they had in their classes. So it was a great learning opportunity for me. Um, I became a national inspector of schools in England, one of Her Majesty's inspectors of schools. And thereafter, I went overseas. I was in Hong Kong as a director of education for the English Schools Foundation. I went to India to lead an international school myself, the British School in New Delhi. I then went to the Netherlands as in the Council of International Schools, which is the group, the accrediting group that accredits the quality assurance and development of international schools. And we can talk about what that means as an international school, because I don't think it's necessarily very clear or an exact definition. And thereafter, after spending 5 years there, I came to the Icon Development Network, where I've been for the last 8 years, working first of all with the Icon Academies, and then thereafter with the academies and the wider group of schools. So all of that has been connected by my values and my drive to try and help schools and students be empowered to make a difference in their society for the better. So that's my career in a nutshell.
So that's a very comprehensive interpretation of or definition of your philosophy, your dedication, your link with education, sir. And I think with your global perspective, we are going to build good conversation on how, education we can benefit from your viewpoint for our audience, and how education can actually play vital role in the context of developing countries for our listeners and viewers, because most of our listeners and viewers are from the developing countries. So, sir, before I go any further, because you have a passion and a whole journey connected with education totally, your dedication is very visible. I would just like to know, for the interest of my audience, for them to know, how do you define education? What is education for you?
Hmm. Hmm. I guess it's a very broad term, isn't it? Thanks for the question, Musara. I think I think we have to see education as for life. It's very easy to focus on the institutions of education, and I certainly do that. I introduced myself as a schools person, but really what we're doing is, for me, education is about developing a person's capabilities to enable her or him to fulfill their potential and to make a positive difference in the world. Now, that's very easy to trip off the tongue, but it's really important to recognize that the different institutions, schools, for example, and governments have a key role to play in that. But education is not just about an institution and what an institution may give, whether that is good or not so good. It's also about the home. It's about parenting. It's about healthcare, and it's about all the foundations to give education for life. If we ask what is education for, I think the only answer I could give is that education of a young person, why invest in it? Is the investment that governments make in education, for example, and parents make and families make, is it worth it? Well, it's worth it, not to accrue wealth per se, but for a young person to be able to fulfill their potential as a member of the human race, and to make a contribution to it that is valued, that they can value, that builds their self-esteem, and that equips them to make a contribution to society and to the cultures in which they're from, which they are their origin, and also that they may be in contact with.
Yes, sir. It's very nice to know, how you see education. It's not about any institution. It's not about even schools and governments. We believe what we see and what I feel subjectively, I would say, and I would like through your, answer, my viewers to know that when the education starts, it start from the school, or as you have mentioned about it's about parents, it's from the school, or is it from the early time of the inception of the child that the education of the child starts from there, the nurturing, the training, the ECD. So somewhere in between we miss out the early years of a child's healthier growth, of his mental nurturing, and we just put the whole responsibility outside. And that is, when parents just start looking at the schools and at the policies of the government. We will go there, but later in our interview. But initially, I would like to take your input how essential it is for parents to recognize that a child's growth, mental and physical, both start from the nurturing or the inception time.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the evidence would suggest, the research evidence would suggest that, and my belief would certainly be that education starts in the womb, and the healthcare and the nutrition of a mother carrying a child is the beginnings and the foundation for the success of that child educationally and in other respects. I think governments have begun to realise the importance of early childhood development, a more formal education, early child development. In other words, they are investing more in ECD, early years education, whatever we term to call it, and um, and then thereafter with schooling, I think schools are often held responsible for all aspects of a child's development. Yet too often we don't appreciate the role, for example, of healthcare and of nutrition and the essential alliance between the health facilities and health provision and nutrition that a child receives and the parental education and then the school education that the child is getting. So I would say it must start from the beginning. Okay, what difference does that make? How does that inform policy development? I think uh, it's informed policy development in the sense that it's led to more investment in ECD, where it's possibly not done enough in many areas is to bring together healthcare, nutrition, in the broadest sense, well-being, and formal education. Too often, the two those two important areas are seen in separate categories, whereas it's the link between the two uh, needs greater recognition, I think. And if you look at the healthcare problems that exist in localities with stunting or with malnutrition, then it's clear that those are having a significant effect on education. And let me just say that in addition to those fairly, perhaps to the viewers, are fairly obvious factors of the link of health and education, health including nutrition and education, there's also the importance of the values and the mindset and the ambition that one has as a parent for children, and the girl child in particular as a as a person who needs the benefit of not only the healthcare but education as well.
Yes, and especially, sir, where I think in countries like ours, where gender perspective is quite missing, and we need to highlight the importance of girl child and the importance of how healthy mothers can actually give better humans, individuals to the schools even. And as you have mentioned, the early childhood education is important since we are a platform which addresses self-care, mental wellness and well-being, and especially women sitting at home. So through your opinion and suggestion, we want our viewers to know the importance of early childhood development, its importance, the nutrition demands that it puts for the children who are about to come into this world. Sir, now as we grow further, so do you think that families and communities have an important part to play once the child come out of their initial nurseries, that is their homes and their uh, um, families, and when they go out, do they get the right environment, like, is the transformation for the children enabling them to grow as better humans, having empathy, having sensitivity, having critical minds, to be aware of what kind of challenges are facing them ahead?
Yeah, thank you. I think the homeschool partnership is essential. Let me go back to give one example of the link between families, health, and education that we faced, that I faced, I guess, with others in the team when we were looking at the Aga Khan schools, which are 200 schools thereabouts. Around 150 of those are in Pakistan. A large number of those are in the north of Pakistan, in mountainous, more challenging environments in every way. But they're also spread across East Africa, Central Asia, and through South Asia as well. We did some research with health services and with Aga Khan University and with Aga Khan Foundation, trying to bring the agencies together to look at how we could do better to to bring the resources together and support better families, communities, schools, including ECD, and the healthcare providers in different areas. We looked at what might be the benchmarks for example, nurses, the ratio of nurses to children in ECD or in school education, and likewise, we looked at family role in with older children, adolescent well-being, and their mental health, and we were looking to try and compare our provision with the benchmarks globally through UN sources mainly, and then begin to plan for action to make these services more joined together. Now, coming back to your question, the family and the community is at the heart of that, because the family and the community spaces are often may often, they can't be assumed to be the not only the linchpins in those partnerships, and they must be partnerships, but also they could be safe spaces. And it's really important in safeguarding children that children have safe spaces, and schools should be safe spaces. They may not be, but they must. The child must have a safe space in the community, in the family, in the school, in order to be able to feel secure and be able
And
to develop.
confident. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you think, sir, as we have come out of recently from COVID, and the entire learning processes during that time were dependent on the technology tools. So, do you think has it benefited the children and the families? And what was the role of the school during that time? Where do you
Yeah.
see? Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's it's the impact of COVID on school education has been very uneven, I think. And I think there's now some impact studies uh, coming through and being published. But there's also, let me start by saying where I think it was uneven is that
Yeah.
a child's access to the school was
Mm-hmm.
very variable in COVID, depending on locality, depending on geopolitics, depending on culture, and and an access to technology if technology was a substitute. Now, we have to recognize that in COVID, there were many, many schools in the global south and elsewhere that did not have access to technology. One of the benefits in the better resource schools of the world at that time was that teachers' uptake of the use of technology and their skills in using technology accelerated very, very quickly. One head I was talking to from Kenya was telling me that she felt there were about 3 years of development of ed tech skills in teachers in the first 6 months of COVID. So, in other words, there was great acceleration and of the development of capability. However, we also know that remote learning is not a good thing. The socialization of learning is really important. Children learn just as we learn from adults, from one another, and from interacting with one another, and from appreciating the other perspectives, even if they are different from one's own, might also be right, is a really important aspect of growth. And with ECD children and very young children, the play-based and activity-based inquiry that is so important in a child's development obviously was largely lacking. So I think the impact was strongest there. We know kind of more formally that remote learning decreased teaching time. So there was a loss of learning, variable levels of engagement. When we're talking about adolescence and adolescent mental health, we saw serious negative impacts during the COVID time. And even during the lessons, we could see that the levels of engagement simply by is the child engaged with what's going on through a screen, for example, could not be assumed. So too much sedentary time, too much screen time, less exercise, less socialization, put it all together in an equation, and it often added up to less learning. And I think that, so where has COVID left us? What's been the impact of it now? I think and our schools different places because of COVID. I don't know that schools are as different as one would have expected them to be during COVID. We thought, I think, that after the after the pandemic, there would be significant changes in the way teachers were teaching and learners were learning as a result of the experience gained. And I think there's been less impact of that than perhaps was anticipated. However, what we have seen is the impact on young people, those, in a sense, not lost years, but years where many children suffered, be it early child development or even adolescence. And let's face it, it's not about exam results, it's about human development at a time. So is the teacher, for example, what have we learned from COVID? Is the teacher likely to be replaced by AI? Is ed tech the panacea for all our educational problems? I don't think so. And as John Hattie, the formidable New Zealand academic who I think at the time was working at the University of Melbourne in Australia, wrote a paper during COVID when we were getting some of the initial studies of the impact of learning, and he was writing about ed tech, and he was saying that his title of his paper was that that all that glistens is not gold. In other words, there's a lot more to be unpicked about the use of technology to support learning than accepting it as the answer. And I think our response has to be, it's about how it's used and the pedagogy approach that's associated with the use of technology integration, rather than the equipment itself and the tools themselves. So I think largely, and the only other thing I would add in terms of the impact of COVID is that extracurricular activities and the enrichment of schooling beyond formal lessons, beyond formal subjects, say, if we see education in those terms, the richness of what can be offered through a community as well as through a school in extracurricular activities was seriously diminished.
Absolutely, sir. And so, sir, somewhere between your opinion, you suggested, like, you highlighted that performance-based learning is actually making the students leave the leadership skills and many other things. So how do you see that the focus of school is now more on assessments and on the learning outcomes? It is more about grades and evaluation, but evaluation is not that evaluation which is taking the whole perspective of the human development. It is just on the performance of the student on a particular exam. So what do you suggest that the schools should do more to bring out the leadership qualities in students and leave this evaluation a bit on the lower side, so that we can have empathetic youngsters coming up who have the know-how where they are living, and they are aware of the critical challenges of today's world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's go back to the question of what are schools for,
Yeah.
and what is a school. And I think there are a lot of factors that are influential on what we see schools as for now. Even before COVID, there was some really important work and writing going on about the purpose of schools and looking at the role of creativity, for example, in child development. And forgive me, because of my kind of cultural perspective, I'm also giving references that are culturally biased to my experience. But one of the most influential both reports, pieces of writing, and a podcast, really, before podcasts became more popular, was by an arts educator called Sir Ken Robinson, the late Ken Robinson. He was British, and he had a significant role in the Royal Society of Arts. He wasn't a schools educator in itself, by background. And even then, he was talking about the factory system that really schools are mimicking. The fact that the school in the West, and I'll come to colonization in a moment, but in Western liberal education systems, like the one that I was part of and went through myself as a kid, the schools are very reminiscent of what they were 100 years ago. In other words, you would go into a school, and unlike going into many, say, hospitals or healthcare centers or other aspects of public life, they would be very recognizable. If you were 100 years old, you'd come back and say, "Oh yes, this is the kind of schooling I went through." I think part of that is that we haven't been able to reinvent schools in a way that
Absolutely.
reflects children's changing needs and the changing needs of society. Maybe I'll pause
Absolutely.
there and come back to that in a minute and address the issue of assessment and the
Mm.
need for decolonizing the curriculum, because I see those two things as wrapped up in one.
Yes, sir. So we will continue from where we left, sir. We were talking about, the schools preparing the students for the world outside
Mm,
before, and how they can get children from the uh,
mm,
the critical thinking can be developed in
mm.
students so that they can start looking outward rather than an inward looking uh, individual. Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We, I'll come to the question of assessment in a
Yes.
moment, but let me first address the parents and what the value. We've talked a lot about values so far,
Yes.
and what are the values that are really important for our children. I'm a parent too. My three girls are in adulthood, but the same applies, I think, across generations. And that is, and I read a quote just the other day that I wanted to bring to you. But I'd also want to ask any of you who are parents who are listening the same questions, which is, what are the values that are really important for our children and for your children and for my children? And the quote is from Jacinda Ardern, who is the former Prime Minister of New
Of New
Zealand.
Zealand.
In society, we want those values of sharing, generosity, kindness, empathy to be developed in young children. And that's what we do as teachers. But they seem to be, Jacinda Ardern said, we somehow seem to see these things, these qualities, as weaknesses in our leaders as adults. If they show empathy, if they show kindness, we want something tougher, more brutal, more directive, more decisive, and
Yes.
somehow we've lost our way. Let me come to link that with assessment. I'd see assessment as part of a triangle like this, so that you can't
Yes.
see it on its own. You've got assessment at one corner of the triangle, you've got curriculum at one, and you've got pedagogy, you've got teaching and learning at the other. And if you imagine those are three pins joined together by some elastic band, they stretch one another. So one pulls the other as an influence on the different dimensions of that triangle. And I think we're in a situation where the assessment styles that are often used are influencing teaching disproportionately, because there is so much emphasis on formal assessments, on pencil and paper tests, on knowledge recall. And not that knowledge is not important. We want children to gain knowledge, but we want them to be able to apply it in different contexts that matter in relevant situations. So we have been left with largely a curriculum that's been formed, 150 years ago almost in the kind of colonial powers in many ways. Britain, my country of origin, is hugely influential in this, in that we have left so many countries with a colonial curriculum that in the worst cases, it's fossilized and it's become an exam dominated curriculum where everything is driven by the chronological top grades
Absolutely.
in a school. And that's influencing everything else. Now, there are ways around this. I mean, it's a small scale example, maybe, but Aga Khan University Education Board I would say the International Baccalaureate as well on a global scale, have respected in the AKUEB's case, respected the single national curriculum of Pakistan, but made the style of assessment more engaging, more interactive, more relevant, less reliant on memory and rote learning, and more meaningful in terms of it's an overused word, perhaps, the critical thinking, the inquiry, the analysis, the higher, or still using knowledge, but applying it in different ways. And the or the IB, pretty similarly, I think, has tried to take a curriculum with a core of knowledge, use a way that is more centered on what the to demonstrate they can do in a more varied portfolio than simply regurgitating uh, the knowledge that had been gained. I learned a lot about this when I was looking at children of high potential for the Aga Khan academies in areas of the world where their schooling had been disrupted, maybe by war or by conflict or by a natural disaster as well as a human disaster. And there, one couldn't rely on assessing what a child had learned at school because they may not have had any school or their home disrupted. Instead, the emphasis was looking at the way they think and their capability. They could shape by looking at a problem solving that has a dimension. So whether they could apply what they felt and what they understood to a different context that was meaningful to them. It's just a small example. It's not easy because I think in contexts where numbers of children in classes are very big and the teacher on her or his own, there is almost a tendency to have to be the source of the information, giving in a very teacher dominated way. But the assessment systems that we have been we've inherited largely encourage that because they're encouraging the recall of knowledge, and there are other ways of doing it. And just going back to the socialization of learning and what we lost in COVID, we want children to learn by collaborating, just as we'd see with young children in the ECD. Some of those same approaches to learning would better serve the older students as well. Doesn't mean to say they have to learn everything in groups, not at all. They've got to be individually assessed. And at the moment, the way things are, they've got to write, they've got to produce writing in order to demonstrate their abilities. And I think we are moving away from it, but we're moving away very slowly and very unevenly across the world. And but I think it will change. I am sure the nature of assessment will change, and that will change the nature of teaching and learning.
That's great, sir. Sir, another question, because Hina also has a question for you. Give it to Hina. I would just like to ask you that what practical steps can schools take to promote emotional and social well-being alongside academic growth?
Yeah, thank you. I think schools have to be safe, first of all, as foundations for learning. So safeguarding approaches and children having people they can trust and go to, trained teachers who are able to be equipped to almost be counselors to children as needed, and listeners matters a lot. I think developing children's voice, being able to encourage children to participate more fully in their learning matters a great deal in terms of helping children to develop the confidence as learners. And ethical leadership. It all starts with leadership of the institution and effective homeschool partnerships. And going back to one of the points we made in our question about assessment,
Yes, sir.
developing how we assess and recognize progress, because every school can do that, can recognize the progress that the children are making in different kinds of ways. So moving towards places where children are able to take responsibility, have a greater sense of agency, enables them, if they are working from the base of a confident, safe space in the school, to be equipped
Yes,
to be agents for development in their communities.
great. Hina, please.
So, because we are in Pakistan and we talk a lot about multicultural environment and diversified kind of a society we have. So, from innovative classrooms to inclusive policies, we are impressed with your work that has touched many corners of the world. So, basically, what I want to know is that what and how does culture influence the teaching methods and learning processes as a whole? And what are some striking differences that you have observed in education systems across the countries you have worked in? And are there any global approaches to address the cultural differences? And are there challenges common to students everywhere?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Hina. Thank you. First of all, I think schools need to have permeable walls. What I mean by that is that they must be part of the cultural context around them in the communities. They need to be out into the communities from time to time, but also they need to begin with a curriculum that is not the same if as one in a different cultural context. In other words, they've got to be localizing the curriculum. So drawing on the richness of the history, the geography, the music, the arts tradition in the culture, the languages of the culture to
Yes.
infuse the learning. So I think schools, at the same time, schools need to set themselves apart from the cultures around them in a sense. And that is, the school ethos must be determined by the school, reflect the culture, but be different from it. In other words, what goes on in school, the kind of practices that of teaching and learning that go on in school may be different from what go on at the home. But at the same time, there needs to be an umbilical link between school, home, and society. What do I see as the biggest commonalities and the biggest differences from schools all over the world? I think the number of children in a class has a big influence on the teaching quality. I think whether the teachers are prepared and trained makes a huge difference, and whether they receive ongoing professional development and growth matters a great deal. In other words, the status of the teaching profession in a society, in a culture, matters a great deal. And in many cultures, as we know, we've moved from a position where the teacher perhaps was highly regarded in society to one where it becomes a role that many would not want to do. However, we all rely on the teacher in terms of entrusting our children to that teacher. It's often said, you always remember a good teacher. Which is true, because they have such a hugely influential role on yours and my development. We also might remember a bad one. So raising the quality of teaching generally. I think the access to technology is a factor, is an important factor in influencing the nature of learning. But I would say schools are not about physical resources first. They are mostly about the quality of the human resource. In other words, in most schools, most of the resources are devoted to staffing. The quality of the staffing matters so much. Um, and that will override to a degree the quality and sufficiency of the physical resources. But let me just recap the main differences and similarities I see. Parents want the same things for their children. Most parents care deeply about their children's education and are supportive of it. They expect schools to be safe and to be learning spaces. The difference in a school's ability to fulfill that mission is in quality of the human resource and how well equipped it has been for 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 teaching, learning, and leadership, and the numbers of children in a class, and then the physical resources. And let me again quote the researcher John Hattie, Professor John Hattie, who did this huge meta-analysis, bringing together all these factors to answer the question, what makes most difference to the quality of students' learning and their progress? And the two things at the top of the list were not about technology or resources or homework or behavior. First thing was quality of the teaching. Second thing, quality of the leadership of the teaching. But in terms of homeschool partnerships and well-being, there must be an emphasis on the wellness and the care given to children pastorally to enable them to flourish. I would see that as the foundation for any academic learning.
So thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
This whole discussion has been so much beneficial for us and for I'm sure for our audience as well. Now I would like to I would like to hear from your personal stories and advices. Can you share with us a memorable story that impacted you deeply and your advice for the educators aiming to work internationally? Yes, sir.
Of course, thank you. Let me give one illustration. As a child, I was, I think, a 10-year-old, so about grade 5 or grade 6. And the thing in my schooling that influenced me most at that stage was a teacher who believed in the outdoor environment being a resource for learning. And he did not just stay within the four walls of the classroom to engage and inspire young people. For me, it catalyzed my interest and motivation in the environment around me, and I've taken that to heart in my own teaching. I think, or tried to. So that was a huge development. I think probably for working internationally and lessons I've learned, I think one learns from successes. One also remembers the disappointments. I think the most important thing I learned was working in different cultural context, how important it is to try and work alongside local staff and local leaders and local educators, and to listen to their stories and their cultural experiences rather than assuming you know best, because usually there are many different ways to approach you, many of which will be valid and successful, and they may not be the ones that you've thought of personally, because my experience certainly is limited and culturally very defined, even though I've worked all over the world. So it would be the privilege of working with local communities as an international educator that would be most seminal on my own development. Thank you.
And you shared the quote of His late Highness Aga Khanpur, that too many of those who ought to be leading their communities in the hopeful world of tomorrow are being left behind in the real world of today. Because good schools are not available to them early in life, they are often blocked from such opportunities as they grow older. So, sir, I hope and I pray that we all work towards the vision of that visionary, and we all try to support and hold each other to promote education in real terms that gives us a society which can give us better human beings. And sir, on this last note, I would just request, as Hena has also, what is one advice that you would like to give to the educators and school leaders about supporting students?
I would, yeah, thank you. I would reflect that message from His late Highness of the Archon IV by saying that the same high standards need to be and expectations you need to have wherever you're teaching, however difficult and whatever, however scarce you are of resources, keep the same aspirations because education is a very long term process and we must always set our standards high and never think, okay, that is good enough for here or good enough for this school or good enough for these kids. It's always about setting the bar high. And what I find, if the more you expect out of children, the more they will rise to it because we can seriously underestimate the qualities and the abilities of the young people around us. And often they just need to be given the space to be able to express it, to demonstrate what they can do.
Thank you so much, sir, for your very insightful conversation with me and Hena. We really appreciate and we wish and cherish to have another sitting with you, sir.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you very much, and thanks to the whole team
Th-
at the We Matter for making this possible.
Thanks a lot, sir,
Yes,
and have a good day.
And you, thank you very
yes.
much.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
sir.
you. Bye.
Bye.
To our audience, we hope this conversation sparked reflection, curiosity, and a renewed belief in the power of education to transform lives. It is clear that when school evolve, whether through inclusive practices, empowered learning, or a stronger focus on values, the ripple effect goes far beyond the classroom. So don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, and follow us for more conversations like this. Until next time, take care and keep learning. Allah Hafiz.